Hello and welcome to Nikon Report, your weekly roundup of all the latest Nikon news and all other photographic announcements that we found interesting. Here's Konstantin.
And this is Becky.
Wow, it's a home edition.
It is, yeah. Doing it in our spare time.
Exactly. So since we're based in UK and in UK it's a bank holiday.
That's right.
We're recording from home.
Yeah, so we're not on the beach like the rest of England.
Exactly. Still working.
Yeah. For you.
Directly to you. Speaking of which, it's number 23. We are the Michael Jordan of Nikon podcast.
23.
Yeah, from all the Nikon podcasts that exist, I know of only one, ours.
Yes.
We are Michael Jordan of them. But Becky, what do you think? Are you more Michael Jordan person or LeBron?
I don't have an opinion on that. I would say the OG Michael Jordan, but that's only because of Space Jam, to be honest. The original.
The original.
Because of Space Jam.
Because of Space Jam. Becky knows Michael Jordan because of Space Jam.
That's right.
In a world where Chicago Bulls doesn't exist or didn't exist at the time,
yeah,
there is a Space Jam.
That's right. I support the Looney Tunes.
Yes, the multiverse.
Right. Our first big announcement this week is Nikon have announced 2 new lenses for their Z lineup. The macro lenses.
Both of them.
That we were all waiting for. So we now have on the way a 50mm f2.8 and a 105 f2.8 S line lens.
Oh, wow. Tell me more, Becky.
Okay. So all we have so far is the basic specs, right? So the 105 2.8 S is an S line lens. That means it's going to be a pro level lens.
Okay.
Now I have to read my notes.
Okay.
We know that it's going to be multi-coated, that it's going to have an Arneo coating and nano crystal coat, that it will be, of course, 1-to-1 reproduction, that it has 9 aperture blades and 4-stop VR.
4 stops?
Yes. So it's going to be great for handheld stuff. I think Nikon are kind of pushing it towards being also a portrait lens as well as a macro lens.
Okay.
So it may not ultimately replace your beloved 105 1.4.
Nothing will replace 1.4E.
But it is a very nice contender for those that want a lens that's kind of dual purpose because of that nice close focusing distance.
Okay. So since we're recording it a day before the announcement, we don't know the price yet.
No.
But in terms of size and weight, is it chunky?
It's quite compact for a 105 from the images that we've seen, but obviously it will be around the size, a little bit larger than the 85. That's about all we know until we physically see one in the hand and we get the weight and all the rest of it.
But is it smaller than the F-mount 105 VR?
I believe so, yeah.
I mean, judging by the images.
Yeah, judging by the images, I believe so. Now, here's an oddity. The 50 f2.8, not an S-line lens, also is 1-to-1 reproduction, has a closest focusing distance of 16 centimeters, so nice and close, is fluorine coated.
Okay. So fluorine is not FL.
No.
It's not a fluoride. It's not the fluoride element. It's a coating.
That's right.
And that's a good coating, the one that's kind of you can clean without any danger of scratching.
Yeah, that's right. It repels dust and dirt and things like that. So quite good as a kind of in the field lens. But another interesting thing about that one is it has a very tiny diameter. It's, I believe, 55 millimeter.
Okay. So the 62.8G, I think, is 62.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 55. I didn't write it down, but I remember thinking, because the ES2 is a 52 mil diameter, you'd need a step-up ring in order to use it.
I'm with you. And size-wise, it's smaller than 60?
Yeah, the 50 is very compact. It looks quite similar to the 24 to 50, but a little bit bigger. So it's probably a couple of inches like that, something like that. Very lightweight, and it's designed to be that kind of small, pocketable, go-anywhere macro lens.
Fantastic. Well, I think they're pretty good announcement. I was expecting only one.
Yes, I know. I thought we'd get a kind of stagger of maybe one now and then another one later on down the line. But I will say, although we don't have the confirmed prices yet, we will put them in the video once we have them.
They're going to be right here. Just like transitions.
Wow. So
flashing graphics. All other things.
But also worth noting that sales should start towards the end of this month. So if you are interested in getting your hands on one, get in touch with us in order to put your name on the waiting list or to place your pre-order, and we will hopefully ship them as soon as possible after the sales start date.
Absolutely. We would recommend to pre-order them, if you're interested, of course, in those lenses, as soon as possible, because knowing the current stock situations, it is probably better to pre-order as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, we already have waiting lists for both of those lenses. So we've got a few people already in the pipeline. You know who you are.
Fantastic. And then tell me, so there was no Z30 announcement?
No Z30 announcement, but I will say that there are supposedly some announcements coming before the end of June. So do watch this space. We will let you know what we know as soon as we know it.
And obviously, it's me. I'll say FTZ Mark II as well.
Yes, of course. Now, funnily enough, there were two rumors on the web.
Okay.
There was one for the Z30, and there was one for a retro-inspired.
Yes. So, do you think so? And this is we're going to have screen going on. And it's like, is Z30 a retro camera? So, my question is the retro camera that's been rumored by Nikon rumors? Is it actually Z30 or is it ZF? What do you think?
It's a really good question. I would love it if there were two different models. However, based on the way that Fuji have done their sort of compact camera releases, you know, the XT series of cameras, they are semi-retro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So potentially the Z30 could be a retro-styled mini camera.
I'm with you. You see, I'm not really XT person. I'm more of an X Pro person myself.
No, I know.
I had X Pro 1 and X Pro 2, so I would love Nikon to release something like this. However, it's not going to happen.
No, I think also to be a small retro-styled camera with, you know how I mentioned when we looked at that mock-up of the Z30 that there was no EVF?
Yes.
Right? But the Fuji cameras had a similar thing where they had the EVF on the side, the little...
Yes, that was XE series
Yes.
of cameras. So there was still rangefinder, but not really optical viewfinder, just a little screen on the back.
Yeah, and hopefully if they do put in an EVF and it is a Z30 and it is retro styled, it will be a better EVF than the others that I've seen.
To be honest with you, I think because it's going to be quite a drastic move from Nikon. So knowing Nikon and them being very traditional in the way they do things and the way the time moves with Nikon as well, I think that we still see the Z30 more in line with Z50, let's say lacking LCD screen, but on the back, the viewfinder screen. But I think ZF would be an entirely different camera. Could be a DX model. I don't see any problems with that.
No.
And to be honest with you, if I'll see one, I will be definitely all over it. And I'm not a DX user at all.
No, it's true.
But I think that definitely we're not going to see entry-level camera as a retro camera. Well, it is nice to have a retro-styled camera because Nikon is not known to have, let's say, a line of cameras that are completely retro. I think it just doesn't make sense. I think we will have a modern camera lineup, and again, one off or maybe two off DX and full frame and retro-styled cameras.
That does make sense. Is this the camera that might make you use DX once again for the first time in years?
I think so, because yes, I did use X Pro series cameras, and I think they're really nice. So in terms of this, if Nikon does something like this, I'll definitely be all over it. Something like FM3A style. So no grip, a nice little prism on top.
Yeah.
Look, I was actually thinking about it, and I was thinking, oh, it's nice to have just a regular shutter release button. But if they would somehow design an attachment where you can kind of clip on, put a winder on it.
Oh, wow.
So just for fun of it, because obviously it doesn't make sense to design the camera with a winder, digital camera with a winder stuff. But if you release a little accessory, charge 50 quid, whatever, you know, but if you release it and then you just wind it and then goes to another shot, that would be nice.
I can't see the purpose of that in digital.
No,
but
it doesn't do anything, but it would be nice, wouldn't it?
I don't think Nikon would make it, but maybe a third-party brand. If there's a manufacturer watching this, then you know, the proceeds and the royalties go to you.
Otherwise, yeah, I'll just 3D print it. Who knows?
You can just 3D print it.
Next up, Nikon released new firmware updates for Nikon 16 to 50mm Z lens, as well as Coolpix A1000.
The 16 to 50 firmware fixed an issue that lengthened the startup times by a few seconds if the camera was turned on while the lens was in the process of being extended.
That's very specific.
Those few seconds really count when you want to take a picture. And
absolutely, because obviously Z50 and 16 to 50 setup is the age of professional digital photography.
Yeah, you need to be able to take a picture immediately.
Every millisecond counts.
That's right. On the Coolpix A1000 firmware, they fixed an issue where pictures would sometimes fail to be saved to certain SD memory cards.
Very nice.
It's quite important. There was also a peculiar one where if the date shot was selected for folder naming in Nikon Transfer to Primary Destination tab, when pictures were copied to a computer connected to the camera via USB, raw images would be transferred using not date shot, but date transferred.
Fantastic. I haven't heard any of it.
Okay, I don't know what that... I think it means that there was a problem with
with things, and they fixed it.
With things. Good.
Fantastic. A quick update from Tokyo. As you know, as we all know, that Tokyo currently is in a state of emergency, so there's a lockdown. Nikon issued an update on that, and they said that they're still implementing lockdown measures where employees that are actually visiting the place is about 30% of the all staff. So they're not working the full capacity, but from 20th of June, they're expecting the lockdown to be lifted. So hopefully it's going to go back to normal.
That's right. Hopefully we will also see just generally things returning to normality by then.
Yeah, maybe even Tokyo Olympics. Who knows?
Who knows? I did hear that I think something like 83% of Tokyo inhabitants don't want the Olympics to go ahead. So
That's interesting.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we're going to have our Euros, aren't we?
Hopefully. Yeah, that's the plan.
Do you think Nikon may use some Z9 in there?
It would be lovely to see the Z9 in action. I think if it doesn't happen at if the Tokyo Olympics doesn't happen, then it has to happen somewhere. You know, they have to get those models out.
So Nikon, the world is your oyster.
Exactly. We're waiting and ready.
Next one up, DPREVIEW picked Z7 Mark II as the best camera for landscape photography in 2021.
Yeah, we're glad to hear that. They said that the Z7 II sits in a class of cameras that are all excellent for landscape photography. For us, though, the Nikon's ISO 64 setting, which allows it to capture 2 to 3 stops more light than most of its peers, gives it an edge in terms of image quality. The additional light gives improved tonal quality in addition to its excellent dynamic range.
Yeah, even for studio work, I use ISO 64 extensively. It just reminds me, that you want to use the lowest ISO as possible. And on many cameras, it's normally 100 or 200 ISO.
Yeah.
So having that ISO 64 doesn't matter what dynamic range, it just sounds nice. So I do use it, exclusively.
You use it because it sounds nice.
Exactly. I don't do things for a reason.
No.
I just do them because they sound nice.
That's fair enough. They also have the D850 in their list of recommended cameras for landscape as well.
A 4-year-old camera, still recommended for landscape work.
By far one of the best, I would say. If you'd like to look at that full list and that recommendation of the Z7 II, the link is in the description box and the podcast notes.
And all I would just want to say, because in digital photography, 4 years old, it's basically a dinosaur camera at this stage.
True.
Nothing works for 4 years' time. Just Z7 Mark II in 3 years.
That's right.
It's going to be obsolete.
Yeah.
You'll try to connect to your computer, it's just not going to work.
But the D850 will still be there.
Still be there. You know why? F-mount.
That's right. All right, next up, we have Capture One released a new version of Capture One 21 with Apple M1 support and other improvements.
Not XP8 support yet?
No.
Well, Adobe released their M1 update sometime in December last year, so it's good that Capture One is now on par with it.
Useful if you use Capture One.
Capture One, yay.
Simples. And Apple have just released their new iMac and an iPad, which both use an M1 chip.
Is that so? Or actually, what I want to ask you is actually the iPad M1, the new Pro. Obviously, it's got iOS on it, 14 or 15, whatever it comes out.
Yeah.
But my question is, because it's M1 chip, would you eventually be able to run a full-fledged desktop version of Photoshop or Lightroom? Because while I do like Adobe initiative of releasing iOS Lightrooms and Photoshops of the world, I don't really like the interface and I don't find them to be as full-fledged as a desktop version.
No, it's very true. It's quite possible. I mean, Affinity Photo, which we'll talk about in a minute, also have an iOS version, which is a bit, it's not quite as comprehensive as the desktop version, but it's supposed to be very, very good. So it would be interesting to know if they can. I think at the moment, the M1 chip just means speed more than anything. It's speed. And I mean, I'm using the last generation, the most recent generation.
Yeah, and it's pretty good, isn't it?
It's fantastic for everything that I need. So
you can play Minesweeper, a Solitaire, I mean, beautifully.
That's right.
At 120 frames per second.
Exactly. But when I'm not playing Solitaire on it, I do use it for most of my work, actually.
Yeah, well, you're writing your books on it, right? So at 1,000 frames per second,
That's
I believe.
how quickly I write, yeah. So having an M1 chip in something like this is going to make it quite a beast.
Absolutely. Can you make have a software that has a type machine sound when you actually type in?
Potentially. You can actually get a keyboard, which is like a typewriter for it.
And can you do this chook?
Well, one day when the coffee fund is expanded exponentially, I'm going to buy myself a typewriter. Petapixel have released an article of the best Adobe Photoshop alternatives.
Ooh.
Now, if you have a look at this article, they recommend the likes of Affinity Photo, they a couple of others that I've forgotten the name of.
Yeah, Affinity Photo, Lumina 4, and then macOS version is Pixelmator. Pixelmator Pro.
Yep.
And then GIMP, which is a free version.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that because I know a few browser-based Photoshop is called Photopea. That's the one that they recommend.
Browser-based.
So it's basically like editing online, which is interesting. I mean, Photoshop browser-based.
Yeah, that's just, I'm trying to line those things up and they don't. But tell me, you've used some of them. Tell me about your opinion, because I'm a bit old-fashioned. So I like my subscription. Yes, people are going to hate me. I pay £9 a month. I get Lightroom, I get Photoshop. Yes, I'm against subscriptions, but the price is good. If they would charge 20, 25 quid for it, I probably wouldn't pay for it. But as a photographer and video editor, it's pretty good. Yeah, with the Adobe Premiere thrown in is about £20. Yeah, which is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. If you do a lot of content creation, so not just photos, but also video work and stuff like that, that whole suite is actually worth it, I would say, for the monthly subscription. I've used Affinity Photo a little bit. I still prefer, because I've used it for so long, the interface of Lightroom. It just kind of, for me, it makes the most sense.
Once you get used to things, isn't it? It's very difficult to switch. And as with everything, people hate change just because they feel warm and fuzzy while they're using the same thing for years. And as I say, yes, photography, videography, etc., it's not a bad price to pay. It's a reasonable price to pay.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are an occasional editor like me, and most of the time you don't edit your photos beyond maybe a little bit of raw processing, then having a standalone software that can just do that, where you pay once, makes total sense. In fact, if you are just going to do that, then you're better off downloading the free Nikon software, which is very, very clunky. But for the sake of converting your raw files, processing raw files, it's actually the best tool for the job.
Well, they normally say if it's clunky, add a bit of WD-40 on it.
That's what you need to do, yeah. So with NX Studio as it is now, which we've played around a little bit, and it's not great, but it definitely does the job. And I think for certain types of raw file, if you are raw processing, it actually does a better job than most third-party software, including Adobe.
I'm with you. So the conclusion is, if you do use the software actively and maybe make money out of it, then it's worth paying the price. But if you're an occasional shooter, let's say, and you don't do photography as often or don't use this type of software, then maybe try a free version. Who knows, maybe buy a full version. The problem with all full versions, unfortunately, nowadays, for paid ones, doesn't matter if it's Capture One or anyone else. As soon as they release a version, let's say 2.0, they'll ask you to upgrade.
Yeah, there is the built-in obsolescence factor.
If you upgrade camera every, let's say, 5 years, you can probably stick to whatever version of software you use. Yeah. And then 5 years' time, instead of upgrading every year, then you buy an updated version. So that could be a plan. But if you want to have the latest and the greatest, and that means you're upgrading every year. So if you look at Capture One, you basically pay the same subscription but once a year because the cost is quite high to upgrade. So at the same time, if you have small installments each month, it's pretty much works out as about the same. Yeah, exactly. Subscription-based software, at least you get that constant updating. That's the thing. And speaking of subscriptions, I don't subscribe, let's say, to Microsoft Office. No. You know, I don't subscribe to any other bits of software. And yes, I'm genuinely against subscriptions. But for this particular thing, because I make money out of it, I do feel it's worth it. But yeah, you have to be selective on what you subscribe, because at some point, yes, you don't have too many subscriptions. No, exactly. And here's another point of discussion. DPREVIEW published an article which is called "Why Have Cameras and Lenses Become So Expensive?" It could be quite a controversial point, I think. But they've said cameras and lenses are getting so expensive these days. It's a sentiment I hear regularly expressed, so I thought I'd take a closer look at what's going on. This is by Richard Butler, who is the writer of this article. Now, he compares various camera models over the course of a few years, so 2010 price versus 2019, or 2005 versus 2019, and looks like things are going up in price for comparable models. Yes, and then it kind of, you know, I started to think about it, and I thought, well, what about the house price in 2010 and let's say 2021? Yeah. What happened? Yeah.
Or even computer prices. I mean, what a camera is essentially these days is a supercomputer in a very tiny body, essentially. So if you compare how much something similar costs 10 years ago to now, it's also going to be more expensive. Do you think that's down to R&D and parts costs?
R&D and development, and then, well, if you took it just in general inflation, that the $100 in 2010 would have more buying power than $100 in 2020, especially when money printer goes brrr. Yeah. I can't say brrr. There's a lot of things there, but the problem there is, yes, it becomes more expensive. For young people starting out now, it's a lot of money to spend. And generally, maybe your parents will help you to get on the ladder, etc., etc. But the used market is so vast nowadays, and the technology of the cameras is so advanced that even 10-year-old camera will do pretty well.
I was going to say, actually, they compare here, for example, the D50 launch price, 2005, was $799, right? The D5000 launch price was a similar, $730. And then the Z50, which they consider to be the kind of equivalent now, launch price was £860. Now, saying that, if you compare a camera, let's say a Z50, for example, Z50 technology is the equivalent to, well, it's actually better than what even the thousands of pounds models were back in 2005. Yeah. So even if you spent, let's say back in 2005 or 2003 or whatever, you bought a D2X, that was in the thousands.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, that was quite expensive. Even D1 was over £5,000.
Yeah, and now if you buy a D3500, for 400 quid, you've got better image quality than the thousands of pounds cameras all those years ago. So I don't necessarily think that camera prices are going up in that sense. I think we're getting more for our money, but the starting threshold is perhaps a little higher than it was.
Yeah, think about the cost of calculator in 1975, and it's probably absolutely
1950.
Exactly,
it was like a giant wall-to-wall computer.
Yeah, it probably didn't exist. There was the manual one there, old-fashioned one.
Abacus.
Exactly, but at the same time, I think we need to understand as well that the market is shrinking. So photography market, just historically, if you look year over year, has shrunk a little bit. And a lot of companies, as well as Nikon, move into a new model, low volume, high margin. Therefore, you sell less goods, but you get slightly more income return on them. We had a comment last week where people say, well, is Nikon becoming the new Leica? I don't think this is the case, but I think the shift towards lower volume is definitely there. Yeah. I don't think we're going to have a full-fledged Leica, because Leica has been producing camera in these particular models for years, for decades even.
They have. And one thing I will say is that, for example, a friend of mine recently bought a Leica Q10 as his holiday camera. Okay. It's about $4,000. And he said, look, it's so small. It's a full-frame camera in a small package. And I was like, have you seen my Z50? Have you seen my Z6?
Only £1,000 for that 50, or even less.
That's right. He's a Canon user, so there's that as well. But
obviously, Becky has very wealthy friends. Can I be your friend as well?
Sure.
I can't pass the the money requirement.
No, but you can be my friend, just pro bono.
I have at least one friend. That's good.
Now, one thing the article does talk about lenses, where he says, you've got these prices from 2001 for a 70 to 200 is about £2,000, and now the equivalent is what, £2,700. So again, but I think that's down to inflation more than anything else.
Yeah, but then at the same time, 51.8 G doesn't give you exactly the same quality as 51.8 S lens.
No, so you're saying that things are getting better.
Well, things are getting better as well. And at the same time, maybe in this particular case, it's not directly one-to-one replacement. Maybe Nikon decided, well, we actually want to have a much sharper lens overall. Therefore, the price.
Yes, exactly. Now, the conclusion to this article was that none of this is intended to excuse any increases in pricing. I think it is. No, I mean, I agree that it should be. This article has attempted to look at the trends in pricing and some of the rationale behind those changes, not influence your response to them, but ultimately the thing that matters more than price is value. What's it worth to you? I have to agree with that. I think that the value of these items particularly as an experienced photographer, has gone up.
Yep.
Like the fact that I could probably shoot similar pictures now with a 400-pound camera to what I shot 10 years ago with a 1,000-pound camera just goes to show me that actually value has increased.
But the thing is, we are in different stages of our life now. And in terms of this, when we were really young, let's say, even £500 is a lot of money to spend.
Yeah.
The older you become, and hopefully you do well financially with your career and the choices you've made, later on, you may think, well, £1,000 is not that bad, or £2,000. And then obviously, if you love photography, or let's say you love photography so much that this is your main hobby and you don't mind to spend money on your main hobby, then the prices don't become that expensive.
No.
At the same time, if you're a professional photographer, you look at it as investment and you know your return on investment as well. So generally photographers buy and they know that it will pay for itself in about, let's say, a year or so. So there are different things in life and we kind of need to think about this way, I would say.
And take it into account when you're buying something that you can also... you can also always look at the secondhand market where a good bargain will always be found.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, a lot of people still shoot film nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, that's even more expensive.
Exactly. But at the same time, the options are there and the world is your oyster.
That's right.
Again, we all call podcasts this way. The world is your oyster.
Now for your review section, we have a review from Matt Irwin, who reviewed the 24-200 Z lens.
In short, he likes it.
Yeah. So if you'd like to see a review about someone who likes the 24-200, then go and look at Con's video on YouTube and then Matt Irwin's video on his channel. Absolutely.
Matt Irwin runs a really good Nikon channel, so a lot of discussion about all the latest and greatest Nikon news as well. So do check him out. The next one up, DPREVIEW TV compares Atomos Ninja 5 and Blackmagic Video Assistant 12G.
Ooh.
So the reason I put it here, because those two are the pro choices for Nikon videographers. So if you need the functionality of RAW, then you either have Ninja 5 or Blackmagic RAW. Remember the Nikon enabled B-RAW functionality a couple of months ago with the firmware update?
Yeah.
So if you still decide between the two, do definitely check this video out. The basic idea there is Ninja 5 is cheap and it does really well for what it is. The Blackmagic has a bit more options.
Excellent.
Thank you, Tilly. You want to bark? Woof!
She just wants to be part of the show.
She's a lap dog.
She is. For your weekend read and watch section, we've selected The Photography of Jason Lee. It's a video by T. Hopper. And Tilly approves.
Yeah, she'll love it.
So if you know the My Name is Earl actor, he is also a skateboarder and a photographer, and he takes some fantastic sort of reportage-y street shots. It's well worth. The video is only about 10 minutes long and it's well worth checking out. And that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching and or listening. If you would be so kind as to give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube or a follow and perhaps leave a review on one of the podcast platforms, we would greatly appreciate it. Absolutely. But if I want to find you personally on the street, Becky, where shall I find you? To hunt me down. You can find me on Instagram at Rebecca_Danese, and you can find Konstantin at Konstantin Kochkin on Instagram. Nice and simple. Yeah. Thank you so much and see you next week. Bye. Bye.